we have a quiet little motel, when in fact it has now become known as the scene of the crime.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies.
You know, this is the first place that looks like it's hiding from the world.
When a mother has to speak the truth and condemn her own son, but I couldn't allow them to believe that I would commit murder.
You want to knock over a casino? 3 casinos?
Vegas, huh?
Vegas?
Vegas.
Fantastic.
The heist is impossible.
Casino security cannot be beaten. You're out of your minds.
Exactly.
People love to talk about movies. Good or bad, old or new. Even people who don't watch movies love to talk about them. And that's what we're going to do here today. This is Talking About Movies. I am Margaret McGurk, and joining us is TT Stern-Enzi, critic, educator, film festival director, a man who wears many, many hats.
Many hats.
And our topic is remakes. We all know that Hollywood suffers from some creative bankruptcy because they keep trying to take somebody else's good idea and make it over and turn it into a successful movie. Once in a while it works. Very often it does not.
Right.
Very often it's impossible to imagine why they thought they could make a success out of it. I think the textbook case of this is Psycho.
Yes. Yes.
The original black and white movie by Alfred Hitchcock is one of the most influential films ever made. Every filmmaker in the world is learned from Psycho. Somebody got the bright idea a few years back to remake the exact same movie, shot for shot, line for line, except in color.
Right. Which, starting off, you just shouldn't remake Hitchcock films.
Right.
Period.
Right. Nobody is Hitchcock.
Yeah. Hitchcock remade Hitchcock one time.
Yeah.
He did it once, updated himself that one time. That's it. He set the standard for what his story should look like. We shouldn't try to, and again, you're right, the whole shot-for-shot reshooting of a film, just doing it in color, there's no creativity in that if you really think about it.
I mean, why bother?
Yeah, what's the point?
It didn't bring in a new audience. It just did nothing. There's a mystery, just like head scratching remakes. Why bother? Happens all the time. There's one that's on the horizon, hasn't happened, and people really are praying that it doesn't. Steven Spielberg, a great talent, is threatening to remake West Side Story,
right?
Which is as classic as it gets.
Yes. Yes.
What does he think he's going to do? How could that? It's terrifying to think of.
And again, I think what's going to happen, people are going to look at the idea, okay, it's Steven Spielberg, maybe he has, a real affinity, or maybe that was one of those touchstone films for him when he was a kid growing up, or whatever, that he's just like, okay, he's invested, his passion is in retelling that story. Yeah. He may get a little latitude for that aspect of it, but again, it just falls in line with this idea that you just don't take something that worked so well.
Right.
And think you can do it better.
Every part of that movie, the original, is just right. It is dated, but it is in a good way, in the right way. It's an object of its time. Trying to modernize it is not going to make it better.
Right. And again, the modernizing aspect, and we're probably going to talk about this over the course of this whole segment, just the idea that audiences today need to see a version of these stories that speaks to them in some way. I think there's a problem with with the logic behind that.
Yes, they give audiences too little credit.
Right.
And they also give themselves too much credit. Other movies that keep getting remade to no particularly good effect. Godzilla. How many versions of Godzilla have been had?
Right.
And are any of them better than the inexpensive black and white little original? Not really.
Right. Not at all.
What about King Kong? How many King Kongs do we have to see before they just stop trying to.
The King Kong problem sets up exactly what we're talking about, because King Kong has been remade all these times, and they've told, maybe not shot for shot, but they've generally told the exact same story every time they've remade it.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to add anything new to it, other than, okay, technologically there are things that we can do now that you couldn't do 50 years ago.
Right.
That, again, that shouldn't be enough of an impetus to sort of spark us to revisit these stories.
Right.
You need more than that. You need to be able to look at it and say, okay, there was something about this that didn't work.
Yes.
And we can make it better. Or there's some tweak that we can give it that will enhance what was there in the first place.
Well, and of course now the temptation is that people think because we've got modern technology, we've got all the digital effects that we can do, we can create creatures, that somehow that's going to solve whatever problems are with the first, and it's like, that's not enough.
No.
You get pretty pictures from it, but it doesn't give you a story.
Right.
Now, occasionally it works, and here's a good example, Ocean's 11.
Yes.
The remake of Ocean's 11 was fresh, it was modern, there was, they modernized the story, but not too much.
Right. I think what's so fascinating about that is you had a director, and again, we just finished talking about Steven Spielberg and West Side Story, but Soderbergh really kind of embraced the idea of that, and you get the sense that that was all him.
Yeah.
His feel and style and tone and everything about it, yeah. If you've got a filmmaker with a particular vision or way of approaching the material, then okay, sometimes maybe it is worth to see where this person is going to take this story idea.
Yeah.
But again, we also have to acknowledge the fact that the first film wasn't necessarily a classic in the way that we might want to look at some of these other films. It wasn't West Side Story.
No, it was not West Side. It was a fondly remembered popular film.
Right.
That's true.
It was the Rat Pack. They were, and it felt like it was just a bunch of those guys hanging out having a good time.
That's right. Well, a great heist movie is hard to beat.
True.
If you have a good cast and you have a sharp story, a nice plot with all the little ins and outs and twists and turns and backflips that you get with a heist, you're gonna, that's hard to resist. Those are usually fun movies.
Right, and like I said, that's all Soderbergh taking all of those elements and sort of saying, okay, I can do something with it. I can have some fun with that.
Yeah.
And it was worth it.
Absolutely. Well, now there's another example that we could talk about. George Romero, who made Night of the Living Dead and kind of invented the modern zombie movie as we know it, remade his own sequel with Dawn of the Dead.
Right. Dawn of the Dead is an interesting film in that I think Dawn of the Dead works because somewhere in the idea and the premise of that story, what it was actually saying when it was first made was still weirdly relevant when it was remade.
Yeah.
We wanted to look at this idea of consumerism and the horrors of consumerism and taking the zombies and having them kind of speak for that mind state.
Yeah.
There was some genius in that, so that was an idea that wasn't going to be dated.
Yeah.
We weren't going to be stuck with trying to figure out ways, like kitschy kind of ways to modernize that. You could tell that story, and it would still feel relevant to an audience today.
That's right.
And you could do more with the technology.
Well, and he also lucked out by getting the abandoned shopping mall,
Right.
As his set, so he could just go in there and tear it up. That was a stroke of genius.
Right.
That really made that work.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have a lot more remakes to talk about. We're going to take a little break. We'll see you shortly.
Basher's in town. There might be an issue with availability.
All right, chaps. Hang on to your knickers.
Leave it out. You tossers! You had one job to do!
That's all you use in the event, right? Nothing else?
Hang on. Are you accusing me of booby trapping?
Well, how about it?
Booby traps are Mr. Tar's style. Isn't that right? Basher.
Peck, ATF. Let me venture a guess.
Simple G4 mainliner, back wound, quick fuse, with a drag under 20 feet. Yeah. Let me ask you something else. Did you search this scumbag? Booby traps on his person? I mean, really search. Not just for weapons. Stand back.
Oh, wait. Here we go.
Go find Griggs. Tell him I need to see him. Who? Just find him, will ya?
Hey, Bash.
Hey, Russ. How fast can you put something together with what I just slipped you?
It's done. Hey, it's done, you pal?
Yeah, he's waiting around the corner.
Oh, it's terrific. It'll be nice working with proper villains again.
Everybody down!
We are back. We are talking about remakes with TT Stern-Enzi. Denzel Washington, one of our finest actors, has made 2, at least, notable remakes. Well, 3 if you count his TV show, but that started as a TV show. But his, he starred in the remake of The Magnificent Seven, which is an interesting story because that movie itself is effectively an American remake of a Japanese movie,
right?
Seven Samurai, which everybody should see. If you haven't seen it, it's a great movie.
Definitely.
And had been remade in the United States as a Western, and then remade for the modern age recently, relatively recently, and then starring Denzel Washington, because he's great. And the idea there, I don't have to tell you, was to have a more diverse cast and theoretically a more diverse audience.
Right.
Did it work? Was it worth it?
You know, it wasn't. But again, and I think part of the reason why it wasn't is because we felt all of that effort to go for the diversity angle. You know, it was the film felt like, you know, it was a checklist from a studio. How do we make sure we hit all these boxes? We have this big name star that we can kind of build it around, but yeah, even Denzel, his performance in that film, I don't want to say that it's flat, but it just feels like, okay, we know we're part of this really weird corporate designed thing. And there wasn't a lot of feeling and heart behind that.
Yeah, it wasn't organic.
Yeah, if you're going to go that route, and again, Denzel has been in a couple of other remakes that probably were also trying to venture into that diversity kind of trend with The Manchurian Candidate,
right,
and then also with Man on Fire. But I would say in both of those cases, the fact that you had flipped the dynamic of the lead performers, the race of the lead performer, didn't feel quite as calculated as it did in Magnificent Seven.
Right.
And we've seen that again, and I feel like we're going to see even more of that because as the numbers are coming out and the studies are coming out about where we are in terms of diversity in Hollywood right now, you know, remakes offer an easy opportunity to take material that is familiar, that audiences are already sort of comfortable with, and then you can say, yeah, let's switch things up.
Yeah.
Let's see what we come up with.
Yeah, we have seen that a number of times. About Last Night, which is a comedy based on a David Mamet play from the 90s or the 80s. It's pretty old.
Right.
Was remade with a black cast. At some point, The Odd Couple was remade with a black cast.
Right.
You know, like you say, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think you're right that Man on Fire certainly worked. That was really good. What did you think about the remake of Manchurian Candidate with Denzel?
You know, that's an interesting film. It had a great cast. I mean, Meryl Streep is in there with Denzel. There should have been more that could have come out of that. I'm not saying that it didn't, and I'm not saying that it failed, but it was a curious experiment.
Yeah,
very curious experiment.
My feeling was that it really felt short of the original because you never had the emotional tension of the original because you really, you know, you didn't really know what was going on with this guy or that guy, or who was really the bad guy and who was really the good guy, and what were the secret motivations and all that kind of stuff. There was a lot to be revealed, and of course, you know, the cast was sensational in the original. So.
But on the flip side, Man on Fire really works, and it's much better because it took a sort of a B movie and again, inserted Denzel into that equation, but it never draws attention to the idea of race being a factor.
Yeah.
So we're just literally kind of watching a Denzel Washington film.
Right, and it's a tough movie. I mean, action movie where he's rescuing a kidnapped child in Mexico City.
Right.
So it's in an interesting place.
Right.
They made really good use of Mexico City, and you're right. It's sort of like the sole savior, tough guy going out there and kicking butt.
Yeah, it is a haunting film and a haunting performance, and it all came together really well. And like I said, it is a real improvement on the original film.
Yes.
So in that respect, you're like, okay, yes, all of these things work. And again, if you're going to talk about diversity, it's an example that I think studios would be wise to use as a case study. And that if you're going to do this, don't make it so obvious. don't go out of your way to try to draw attention to this.
One from column A, one from column B.
Right.
Yeah, you see so much that.
Just tell a good story.
Yes, exactly. Well, see, this is every problem that every movie has. Almost always comes down to the story wasn't there.
Right.
If you got a good story, people will forgive you almost everything, including bad casting.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, with remakes, the whole idea of that, it's at some point I feel like we're losing that sense of story, because again, it feels easier to set up a template.
Sure, and then it's just plug and play.
Right.
And you can tell when you're watching a movie like that. It's like it have its entertaining parts to it. They're maybe diverting, but it's not really engaging.
Right.
It doesn't really reel you in the way a great movie does. A great movie really goes right in there and grabs you and pulls it right out.
Yeah.
And Denzel knows how to do that with almost any role. So if he's in a movie where you're kind of going, oh yeah, okay. That's
right.
The concept behind the movie was really wrong.
And that's exactly what The Magnificent Seven felt like.
Yes.
You felt like with him and Chris Pratt and all of these other pieces that they had plugged into that.
Yeah.
It was supposed to move along, and they were hoping that something was going to spark by having all of those elements together. And then there was just no spark.
No.
Yeah.
Well, they lost they lost the part of the Seven Samurai that made it such an attractive property to remake in the first place.
Right.
There are a lot of movies that have been remade from foreign films that are pretty good. Italian Job is one. I thought that was a really good movie. Yojimbo has been remade as Last Man Standing, and a couple of other different things.
Although in this conversation of remakes of earlier foreign films, you've got Old Boy too from Spike Lee, which did not come close to the original version of that film.
No.
And how do you figure out translating these kinds of stories from a foreign audience to an American audience?
Exactly.
It's a tough game.
Well, and I think it's easy to get distracted by the superficials.
Right.
But if we have the right kind of weapons, the right kind of cars, the right kind of settings, we have people go through the motions. It's like, yeah, they're still going through the motions.
Right.
It's still not.
And we'll see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have more to talk about. We will be right back. We're back talking about remakes, and we're talking with TT Stern-Enzi. Now, there's some remakes work well enough. They actually are pretty good. True Grit is an example.
Yes, True Grit is a great example. And again, part of what I think makes that so interesting is in terms, it doesn't necessarily top the original.
No.
But you have the Coen brothers who kind of figure out a way to take, again, a film and a story that they were intrigued by early on and, again, had a passion for, which that's sort of the trend.
That helps.
If it's going to work, you have to have that basis to start with.
Right.
But then they were able to take that and kind of work in their own quirky kind of sensibilities.
Absolutely, yeah.
Casting was great.
Very well cast.
Yeah. And again, you can make something that, again, like I said, it doesn't exactly top the original. But
it holds up.
It stands alone in its own right, and it works as an engaging enough story that, again, draws us into it. And it works for a modern audience. Yeah.
Another one, and it's not as new of a remake, but it's sort of the same thing, that a director went, oh, I got to remake this movie because I know I can do better, is The Thing. The original was black and white, and it was very kind of moody, and you didn't see too much. Well, then John Carpenter gets his hands on it, and all hell is breaking loose.
Yes.
And you see the monster running around, and just all kinds of wacky stuff goes on.
And and again, like we're saying, and that's one of the, once you find a director who sort of says, okay, I see something here. I've got a vision. It's going to be my style. And in this case with Carpenter, it's I'm gonna go all over the place with this. I'm gonna really and just have some fun with it.
Yes, absolutely.
Take it apart.
Yeah, it was a pretty fun movie.
Yeah. It
was pretty fun. Let's talk a little bit about Dune.
Yes, I'm a huge Dune fan. I've actually at this stage have read not only all of the Frank Herbert books that he wrote before he died, but I have now actually read all of the books that his son has written in that world as well. So there are 18.
So we start with this huge library of books.
18 books in that series. It looks at, and again, it's an interesting idea. Herbert, with the first book, wanted to kind of get into a question of not just science fiction, but also ecology and
it's a very big
mythology.
It's a whole universe, really.
It is a huge universe.
The David Lynch version of Dune, highly controversial. Some people, a minority probably, really love it. You're not in that minority.
I'm not, and I'm a huge David Lynch fan. I love his films and his sensibility. I just feel like in the case of this film, he was given an opportunity to kind of step in and to do something that he kind of thought might have been a passion project, but I don't think he was quite as invested in it. And then it became a bigger thing once he got into it, and it just got out of hand.
Who knows what's going through David Lynch's mind ever about anything? We mention this because it's been remade for television. There have been television versions.
It has been remade for television. There is now a film, another adaptation of it, in this case, sort of a remake of Lynch's film. That's going to be done by Denis Villeneuve.
Oh, yeah.
From Arrival. He just gave us the Blade Runner 2049 film. And he has said for the last 3 or 4 years that this is a passion project for him. He read the Dune books as a child, really loved them. They kind of gave him the inspiration for venturing into telling sci-fi storytelling.
Right.
So this is, again, you read it and it sounds like this is a perfect fit.
Well, I'm going to hold out hope for this one because he is the kind of director who I think could actually bring those books to life. Because I was the same way. I read those books. You're immersed. You're living in a different universe, and to really build that universe and show it on the screen is very tough. It's so densely packed with information that you can get lost in. I think that's part of what happened with the Dune version.
And the funny thing is, there's a documentary out there, a little scene documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune.
Jodorowsky's Dune. If you haven't seen it, find it. It's really good.
Alejandro Jodorowsky was a cult filmmaker back in the late 60s, early 70s. He made a couple of cult films, kind of really made a splash and a name for himself, and someone just said, okay, well, we'll give you the opportunity to do whatever you want next. And he had never read Dune. He just knew it was a hot book at the time, and he was like, That's what I want to do. And then the documentary Jodorowsky Stone looks at him sort of realizing after reading about 30 pages of the book that he didn't really want to do Frank Herbert's Dune. He wanted to do his own version of it, which in terms of remakes is sort of a fascinating idea.
It's a completely weird idea. Of course, his version never got made. Right. Although after you see this documentary, you'll wish it had.
Yes, you will.
It's like, I really would pay to see that.
You totally will. But the genius of that is this is a guy who just said, you know what, there's source material here.
Yeah.
But I don't care about it in that way. I've got my own story that I will allow this source material to sort of let this be the springboard for something, but then I'm just going to go somewhere else with it. And I honestly wish that in terms of the studio system, it would be really interesting if more filmmakers went to studios with these remake ideas and just said, well, yeah, I'll just take this film that maybe didn't work quite as well as it should have when it was first made, and I'll just do something else with it.
Well, I think a lot of people go in there thinking they can do that, and
well,
how often does that work? The Great Gatsby is a movie that was remade recently, based on one of the most famous novels in America.
Yes.
Which so many people have had to read in school, for example. It was Martin Scorsese, right? No.
Baz Luhrmann.
Baz Luhrmann. I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm getting it confused with something else. Baz Luhrmann. It was, I don't know, it didn't ring my bell. Well, I can't even say exactly what was missing about it, but
he's one of those guys with a style and a sensibility that, again, he's big, he loves music, he loves the movement of things.
He made Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, so in theory, there is something that you could see there was some sort of possible connection that could have taken place with his ideas and sensibilities in the story. But I feel like you're right. So many of us have encountered that story in the novel form, and the problem with it for me, and again, I love the novel, Daisy Buchanan as a character on the page is one thing that is vague and dreamy and an idealized kind of figure that when you try to translate her onto the screen, she doesn't work. And if she doesn't work on the screen, then the film doesn't work.
Yes.
So you don't have a way into that.
See, I also think both versions of this movie spend so much time showing you what the rich life is like. And when the real the real point of the story is the hunger and ambition of the person who doesn't have that stuff. So it dives in too deep into the thing that the guy is reaching for. And in both cases, if it were more, further away, so that all those things are out of reach, you see his resentment at not having it, that kind of thing. I think they missed the emotional hook there.
Right. Which would mean you'd actually be telling a different story.
You'd kind of be telling a different story, but I saw this in the story that I read in the same book that you read. So, you don't have to rewrite the book in order to look at it from different perspectives.
Right. Well, there's a certain question, I think, that comes up with the whole idea of remakes, and it's this idea of creativity and inspiration.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very easy, and again, I know I fall into this sometimes as a critic, to look at the idea of the remake and say that there's nothing new or original or creative in that notion of doing this. But there can be, if it's done right. I think we've come up with more than enough examples of directors and writers who sort of say, well, there is something that I see there,
and I know how to do it.
And I know how to tweak it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being with us, TT. This has been fun.
This has.
We'll have to do it again.
All right.
Thank you for being with us. This is Talking About Movies.
The Magnificent Seven.
We wish you to help us.
There's this man, Calvera.
A thief. A murderer. He and his men, they steal our food. And then they leave us to starve. And he will do so until he is stopped.
Even 5 wouldn't give us too much trouble.
There won't be any trouble if you ride on.
Ride on. I'm going into the hills for the winter. Where am I going to get the food for my men?
Buy it or grow it.
Or maybe even work for it.
7.